Pope Francis in Africa. The Holy Father spends his first full day in Mozambique, what he said in a meeting with the country's president. Picking up the pieces. Deadly Hurricane Durian has left the Bahamas. We have a report plus reaction from a church leader on the destruction left in its wake. Fight for the unborn. A Democrat running for president says he's open to discussing population control. And face to face, the vice president is in England, what he and Prime Minister Boris Johnson said about Brexit. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 5th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Pope Francis opens a visit to 3 nations in southern Africa in Mozambique. We have details on his meeting with the country's president, but we start with his arrival at an interreligious gathering of young people. That's where the Pope was given an enthusiastic welcome. The young people chanted reconciliation in Portuguese. Pope Francis told them to look toward the future with hope and encouraged them to dream. Earlier in the day, the Holy Father met with the President Filipe Nyusi and opposition leaders. He praised their courage in signing a landmark peace treaty to end decades of sporadic fighting.
Tais são as armas da paz.
The Holy Father said he is hopeful the accord will lead to permanent peace. He praised the president, a Catholic, and the main opposition leader, a Muslim, saying they put the common good ahead of their personal interests. The country's civil war ended in 1992 after an estimated 1 million people were killed. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, is on the ground in Maputo and has this report.
Well, it is a busy day today, 3 addresses in his first full day in Maputo, Mozambique. The Pope spoke first of all to political leaders. He told them to continue to strive for peace in the country after a recent peace accord. And he also told them that the true wealth of a country is how they serve the poor. He then went on to meet youth at an interreligious meeting in the city. Very exuberant, lots of jubilant crowds there. And he told them to never give up when times are hard and to work as a team. And he said that God's love is about building up, not knocking down. And lastly, he met bishops, priests, religious, seminarians and catechists in the local cathedral, the city's cathedral. And he said that times change, but not to look back. He said the promised land is before us, not behind us, and in our lament for times past, we are turning to stone. He also said to beware of spiritual worldliness, which he said can lead to weariness. Tomorrow he has his a morning mass before flying on to Madagascar, the second leg of his 6-day tour. Traveling with the Pope in Maputo, Mozambique, Edward Penton, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up later in the newscast, we will preview the Pope's trip to Madagascar and the extreme poverty the Holy Father will see there. Hurricane Durian is closing in on the Carolinas, and officials say the storm is likely to cause extensive damage.
Hurricane Durian is ready to unleash its fury on our state. The storm has regained strength. It is serious, and it can be deadly. The message this morning is this: get to safety and stay there.
The storm is battering the South Carolina coast with high winds and heavy rain. Hurricane Durian left a path of devastation in the Bahamas. At least 20 people are dead. Officials say it may have caused $7 billion in damages. Joining me now from Nassau in the Bahamas is Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Philip, welcome back. Hurricane Durian pounded the Bahamas with high winds and rains for more than 2 days. Give us a sense of the destruction the storm left behind in its wake.
Well, that sense of that destruction is something that we've only just been getting over the last 24 hours or so. As you can see behind me, blue skies now. Now we're seeing how devastated those 2 islands are. The islands of Abaco and Grand Bahama on the northern end of the Bahamas. That's where Hurricane Durian stuck around for a whole day and a half. And the devastation is quite something to see on that aerial footage that has been making the rounds. But also when you look at the death toll, of course, it stands at 20 right now. 17 dead on one island, on Abaco, 3 on Grand Bahama. And the fear is clearly that that death toll will be going up further and maybe considerably so. Those certainly are the warnings from the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, but also from aid groups, some of whom are only just starting to get into the areas that are most affected. That's why the fear of a bigger death toll is so concrete right now.
Let's expand on that. What are relief and recovery efforts like at this point?
Well, they're very tough. It's very, very difficult to get from here, from Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, to those two islands that are essentially cut off from the world right now. There are three ways of getting there, essentially. One, by boat. We've seen military ships from the UK Royal Navy, for example. One has been able to get into the only functioning port in that area right now. There is also only one functioning airport on those two islands. It's on the southern end, a relatively long way away from the affected areas, and only a very limited amount of planes with aid are even able or allowed to land there at this moment. The third way of getting to those islands from here or from Miami, for example, would be by helicopter. We've seen the US Coast Guard, for example, perform evacuations, and those evacuations that are still happening, people still arriving here in Nassau, in the capital of the Bahamas, and those helicopters at the same time are trying to bring a maximum amount of basic help. That might be water, food, medicine. All the basics are needed on Abaco and Grand Bahama right now.
Philip, I understand you've been in touch with faith-based groups. How are they making a difference? What are they trying to do?
Well, they are having the same difficulties that pretty much all aid groups are having right now. I spoke to Catholic Relief Services earlier, and they say that they are bringing an emergency response team in tomorrow, and that team will then slowly but surely try to distribute aid, water, for example, or food, medicine, hygiene kits. It's just an example of how long it takes and how difficult it is to get these logistics going in a disaster area like this one. I also spoke to evangelical aid groups, smaller ones, larger groups. The smaller ones are having trouble getting the material that they have amassed, donations, for example, to the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama. Then you have a bigger group like Samaritan's Purse, for example, who have their own plane that has already landed here in Nassau, in the capital, and they should be able to get smaller planes and helicopters to bring that aid to those islands. But all of these groups are having major logistical hurdles. That's something that we've been seeing for the last few days, ever since Hurricane Durian finally left the Bahamas.
As if the hurricane wasn't bad enough, now we have so many challenges, of course, when it comes to the recovery efforts. Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press, thanks so much for the update.
Thank you.
To talk more about how the church is responding, we're joined via Skype by Archbishop Patrick Pender of the Archdiocese of Nassau. Your Excellency, welcome and thank you for joining us. Ahead of the storm, you'd warned your flock in a letter of how important it is to be prepared for these kinds of storms. What was it like, though, when Hurricane Dorian actually hit?
Well, Hurricane Dorian hit the northwest Bahamas as a Category 5 plus storm with sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. And accompanying storms surges of between 15 and 20 feet. They say it's really the most powerful storm ever to hit us, and the results show. I mean, the devastation just shows. Grand Bahama and Abaco, those outside of the Providence, those islands actually contain the largest centers of population in the country. So you're talking about around 70,000 people who've been impacted by this storm, many of whom have lost homes. And the most tragic thing is we were informed last night by our Prime Minister that the death toll now stands at 20, and it could, in fact, increase.
And I know your archdiocese oversees so many of these churches that are in the areas that were hardest hit. What are some of the most urgent needs from the people on the ground right now?
Right now, the most urgent needs are the basic necessities of life: water and food, and some medicines. But remember that this is the nature of this particular devastation is such that this is going to be long term, because after the initial stage of responding, we then will have to do a lot of rebuilding. Right now, I'm just learning that our school in Marsh Harbor, Abaco, has basically been severely damaged to the point where it's frankly useless right now. Our parish church there is ending up to be right now it's being used as a kind of impromptu shelter for so many who have lost their homes in the storm. So there's the initial needs of things, the basic things, food, water, shelter, blankets, and so forth. And then in the long term, there's going to have to be a lot of rebuilding as well.
Pope Francis has asked for prayers for all of those in the Bahamas, including the people that you mentioned. Some of the areas were spared, others destroyed, as you described. What is your message to your flock, to the people during such trying times?
The most important thing for us to do is to be strong, to just rely on the strength of the Holy Spirit, the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, and the peace of mind that the Spirit gives us while we seek to support each other, to care, and to be each other's brothers and sisters keepers. That's really critical at this time. And of course, to move beyond any kind of divisions, in fact, to work in unison.
And what can we as Catholics in other parts of the world do to help?
Well, of course, it's always good to, the material assistance is very, very important, including monetary assistance, and also to keep us in your prayers.
Okay, very good. Well, that is so important, and I know that our viewers will be keeping you and your archdiocese, the whole region, in our prayers. Archbishop Patrick Pender of the Archdiocese of Nassau, thank you so much for giving us the update today, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders says he's open to discussing population control, and what President Donald Trump says about climate change. Officials in Texas are trying to revive a law that would require babies killed by abortion to be buried or cremated. A three-judge panel heard arguments today, but gave no indication when it would deliver a ruling. Last year, a federal judge in Texas blocked the measure. Attorneys for the state say abortion providers have not proved burying or cremating a child would deprive women of a right to have an abortion. Senator Bernie Sanders says population control will be central to his plan to protect the environment if he's elected president. Faithful Catholics are condemning his comments and calling them disturbing. They came during a CNN town hall on climate change. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason.
Wyatt, 7 hours of town halls, one Democratic presidential candidate after another, 10 in all taking questions, some proposing simple changes like banning plastic straws. Senator Bernie Sanders with a more radical approach that today some are calling alarming.
Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth.
A teacher from Connecticut worries about a population bomb.
Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact.
She asks if Senator Bernie Sanders will make population control a key part of his plan to fight climate change.
Well, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
That comment drew criticism from pro-life Americans and some experts. Stephen Mosier of the Population Research Institute says women in developing nations want something else.
We've done surveys in African countries, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Kenya. They say they don't want birth control, they don't want abortion. What they want is clean drinking water. They want primary health care for themselves and their children.
Another town hall participant asked if people should even have children because of the threat to the environment.
Is it fair for us to expect our children to continue the cycle of family and generation in a world whose chaotic climate future we knowingly create?
Mosier tells me the world actually needs more babies, not fewer.
Planet Earth is a cornucopia of riches that we can unlock with our creative intelligence and make life better for all of us. There's no overpopulation problem on planet Earth. The planet absolutely can sustain population growth. Up to the Food and Agriculture Organization tells us 12 billion people we can easily feed. We're never going to get to 12 billion people.
Another presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, is calling for the end of the Senate filibuster if needed to pass the Green New Deal. Previously, she stopped short of calling for the end of the filibuster. Last night, she also called for banning of fracking. That's the process where a pressurized liquid is used to fracture, to break apart rock to get at the gas. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Democrats weren't the only ones talking about climate change last night. President Donald Trump also weighed in. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump says America already has clean air and water. That was one of his many responses on Twitter to Democrats last night. But outside of politics, care for creation is a Catholic concern.
As Democrats presented their climate proposals last night, President Trump blasted their ideas, calling them unnecessary and costly. He wrote on Twitter, "The Democrats' destructive environmental proposals will raise your energy bill and prices at the pump." The president pulled the U.S. out of the International Paris Climate Agreement in 2017. And as Democrats promised to rejoin the accord, President Trump said it, quote, hurts Americans and cost a fortune. Not on my watch. When he was asked about climate change at last week's G7 summit in France, President Trump shared similar concerns.
And I'm not going to lose that wealth. I'm not going to lose it on dreams, on windmills.
Democrats and Republicans are mostly divided on the issue of climate change, but a rare bipartisan bill on carbon pricing was introduced in Congress earlier this year. Proponents say it would significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The bill received the support of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, calling it a hopeful sign that more and more climate change is beginning to be seen as a crucial moral issue, one that concerns all people.
Pope Francis has also made the environment one of his priorities. In 2015, he wrote a papal letter called Laudato Si. In it, he says it's not possible to care for the environment without first defending human life. The Holy Father condemns abortion and population control, saying respect for creation and human dignity go hand in hand. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Up next, new details on the fate of the controversial extradition bill in Hong Kong. And as Pope Francis prepares to visit Madagascar, we look at the country and its extreme poverty. Authorities in Greece say it's illegal for schools to keep records of the religious faith of students. The decision follows complaints by an atheist group. There are several instances where a student's faith is noted, including where non-Greek Orthodox parents must sign permission for their children to be exempted from mandatory religious education classes. At least 3 people are dead after a car bomb rocks the area housing the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. The blast also wounded 30 others. The Taliban claimed responsibility. It was the second major strike by the militant group in the country's capital this week. A U.S. envoy is in town talking to officials about a deal to end America's longest war. Turkey is threatening to allow a flood of Syrian refugees to leave the country for the West.
İstediğimiz şekilde fiilen başlatmakta kararlıyız.
President Recep Erdogan says his country is being left to bear the burden of the migrants, and he's seeking support from the European Union. Turkey opened its borders to Syrians in 2011. It's home to 3.6 million who fled the civil war. Vice President Mike Pence is in the United Kingdom and weighs in on Brexit.
I spoke to President Trump this morning, your friend, and he asked me to send you his very best greetings and to assure you that the United States supports the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union.
The Vice President and Prime Minister Boris Johnson also discussed a free trade agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom. Vice President Pence is wrapping up a week in Europe. And in Italy, Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte presides over his first cabinet meeting with a new government and included the traditional ceremony of the bell. Conte's first 14-month coalition collapsed last month. The new government was formed earlier this week. Officials in Hong Kong say the extradition bill that sparked months of protests will be withdrawn without a vote or debate.
Since my announcement, I noticed that there are still some worries about this particular procedure. I want to reiterate here that the sole purpose of the electoral procedure is to withdraw the bill.
Removing the proposal was one demand of pro-democracy protesters, but they have several others, including an independent investigation into alleged police brutality. Pope Francis will touch down in Madagascar tomorrow for a 4-day visit. It's the world's 4th largest island, home to wildlife that exists nowhere else on Earth. But despite its natural bounty, the island nation has struggled with extreme poverty. On the outskirts of Madagascar's capital, garbage trucks make their way past groups of scavengers at the city's largest dump. 19-year-old Suzia and 16-year-old Falana sort through the burnt refuse, pulling out bits of charcoal and throwing them in baskets. Seeing people living in this dump inspired Father Pedro Opica, a native of Argentina.
Les femmes, les hommes.
Father Pedro works with the poor. He opened a granite quarry to give locals a chance to earn a small salary, about $1 a day.
On a commencé ici, c'était un enfer.
He says when he started, it was an inferno. Today, 700 people work in the quarry. During his visit to Madagascar, the Pope will tour it and meet some of the workers. Suzanne has been working here for the past 20 years to help support her 6 children. The 65-year-old says the Holy Father's visit has filled her with joy. Jose, an English teacher, is practicing with the choir that will perform for the Pope.
The biggest problem is really the poverty, and it's difficult to live in Madagascar.
And of course, stay with EWTN as we continue to follow the Pope's trip. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Kathryn Hadro talks with Mayra Rodriguez, a former director of 3 Planned Parenthood clinics in Arizona. She's sharing her story.
I was afraid to come forward, but I knew I had to do it because I want other people to be able to come forward. If they see something wrong, then they should come up and say it.
To hear more of the interview, watch EWTN Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight. Visit EWTN.com for more airing times. And we thank you for watching our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.